Hey guys, welcome back to another Why No One Plays episode. Okay, so if you remember a couple weeks ago, I made a community post featuring Toma's thumbnail and said that was going to be my last Why No One Plays before Sumuru comes out. But there were two things that made me change my mind. One, there's a possibility that Toma will encounter some newfound attention with Dendro and its accompanying reactions. I want to hold off on this episode until that happens, so I can add that in the video as a means of potentially encouraging players to try him out, since that's the main premise of Why No One Plays anyway. Two, it's not OCD per se, but there have been way too many warm color thumbnails on Vars 2 as of late. A lot of red, orange, yellow and stuff, with the last green thumbnail video being the one on Genshin's weapon system. Yes, as stupid as it sounds, that was actually one of the reasons that led me to switching up characters. So instead, for today, let's talk about the sleepy tanuki, Sayu. Just a moment before we continue on with the video, I have a quick shout out to our sponsor for today, Guild Wars 2. More specifically, they're actually porting over to Steam for the first time. As I'm sure many of you know by now, Guild Wars 2 is one of the biggest and most critically acclaimed MMOs of all time, completely free to play with no subscription required. Unlike other competing titles in the genre, it's not as grind heavy since there's no gear treadmill, so even though it's been out for a long time, you can easily get up to speed on things. And speaking of up to speed, earlier this year they released a new expansion called The End of Dragons, which features a ton of new content to explore, and to commemorate that, the main website has a comprehensive new player guide to help you out for your first 20 levels. If you're interested in trying out a new MMO, I have a special package for you if you use my link. The bundle contains an item, karma, and experience booster, as well as an account-bound 10-slot bag and a Black Lion miniature claim ticket. I should mention one thing they really pride themselves on is the mount system. They have some of the most dynamic mounts out of any modern MMO. For your convenience, the link will also be in the description below. Thanks to Guild Wars 2 for sponsoring the channel once again. I actually got sponsored by them before, and just to remind you, they ported it over to Steam, so you can feel free to download there. I would say Sayu's a character who is well known more for reasons unrelated to her gameplay than those that are actually conducive to it. For one, many people are aware of who her English voice actress is, and
dumb, toxic, useless piece of shit.
A lot of memes came from it. A lot of memes. When she was first announced, the first thing that came to my mind, and I'm sure a lot of people's minds, is not excitement but a question, and that question would affect just about everything that has to do with her low popularity. So far up until that point, the Anemo classes featured some of the game's most popular and versatile units on a relative scale. While other elements like Electro and Geo took a while before a solid lineup of characters was formed, Anemo wasted no time getting its feet off the ground. Literally. Widely considered by many to be the strongest element in Genshin, its representatives are famous for a multitude of aspects: crowd control, damage amplification, area coverage, exploration mobility, and synergistic flexibility. Prior to Sayu's release, Anemo had yet to debut someone who was not at the very least above average in usefulness. Unfortunately, that streak would end with her. I should probably remind everyone watching that I harbor no ill feelings toward the character personally, even though I will be critical towards her gameplay. I skipped the disclaimer this time around since by now it became overly repetitive. Anyways, Sayu's design can only really be described as gimmicky. She's a short-stature Claymore user, the first of her kind, and a lot of players were hoping they would retain their massive size despite her lack thereof. Disappointingly though, yet understandably, Claymores are significantly smaller when wielded by her. With the prevailing knowledge surrounding Anemo characters, players are expecting Sayu's repertoire to possess a combination of mobility, crowd control, and supportive elements. Technically she does, but not the correct assortment, and not enough of it to stand out. While it's nowhere near as conflicting as the likes of Xinyan, Sayu's design is split between two things that don't really mesh well or play off one another. It's gonna take a bit of explaining to show you what I mean. Prior to the advent of Yelan, roughly half a year after her release, Sayu's shining virtue was her uncontested ground mobility thanks to Fuying Dash, with one of the most adorable and comical animations Genshin has seen to date. When holding the skill, she would travel at accelerated speed, damaging all enemies that come in contact with her. While the Whirlwind Kick at the end of the roll does pretty solid damage, the skill is famous for its extended mobility, by all accounts a better sprint. With Sayu, you can reach your destination at a faster pace than any other character. Mobility is a huge selling point for Anemo units. In the beginning of Genshin's lifespan, Venti's ability to propel himself upwards made exploration so much more convenient, as you could reach areas high above that would otherwise be very tedious to get to through other means, especially when collecting Atomoculi and Geoculi early on. Kazuha's elemental skill was essentially a more fluid version of Venti's hold. Unless you count Xiao's lemniscatic wind cycling, Sayu was the first Anemo character to bring latitude-centric mobility to the table. The problem is, she lacked the most crucial element of those mobility skills: damage. While the increased movement is no doubt a blessing for quality of life purposes, what every unit is ultimately graded on is their total offensive contribution, whether through their own attacks or through supplementation of their teammates. Sayu's offensive contribution ranks far below any of her peers besides Anemo Traveler. She provides nothing of value to her party that assists in boosting clear speed and or damage output, automatically reducing her effectiveness in practical scenarios. I'm not saying she has no damage whatsoever. With her constellations maxed out, the damage of her skill and burst go up. but only the latter is a persistent effect, and neither increased by enough to offset the opportunity cost of using her over other characters. The incentive to use Venti, Kazuha, or Xiao has more to do with their incredible DPS contribution than their actual mobility. Each dash on Xiao deals enormous damage coupled by a stronger baseline. For Kazuha, he's able to force all nearby enemies into a tight spot and subsequently plunge attack into them for good damage. Venti's is a bit less practical, but is balanced out by its overpowered ultimate. The same applies to the other two as well. Their offensive pressure, whether inflicted by proxy or directly, is what makes them so useful to have. You get access to greater mobility without losing out in damage. For animal units without mobility like Sucrose, Hazel, and Jean, they still bear some semblance of area control and also good damage themselves. Sayu, on the other hand, forces too great of a net loss in DPS to be used in combat. But what if she's not meant to be an offensive support? Good question. She's not, never was. What Sayu does for her team is healing, courtesy of Mujina Flurry, summoning a Daruma that repeatedly damages the nearest enemy while simultaneously healing the nearest ally, giving you have Constellation 1. Furthermore, all relevant corresponding aspects of her kit pertain to increasing said healing, both of her passive talents for example. Someone more capable heals her entire party with every swirl reaction, while No Work Today causes her elemental burst to gain a wider attack radius and AoE healing, except that second part can only be pulled off in co-op. In single player, as of making this video, it's effectively worthless as you can't have two characters on field at the same time. We already went over Constellation 1, which in all honesty should just be included in her base kit, but whatever. Constellation 2 is a flat damage increase with Sayu, although we already established that she's not meant to serve as your main or even sub DPS. Constellation 4 grants 1.2 energy for every swirl reaction triggered by her, that's very specific, and Constellation 6 increases the healing and damage output of her Daruma corresponding to her elemental mastery. You know, standard fare. In essence, the only things provided by Constellations are more damage and healing from only Sayu. She contains no method of boosting her team's damage whatsoever, greatly hurting her combat efficiency. One could argue that building elemental mastery on her can allow for equal parts healing and damage thanks to increased swirl, but considering just about every Anemo character benefits from EM to an equal, if not greater extent, that can't be used in her defense, and so the only situation where a player would want to use Sayu is for healing. But there are two issues behind that, one of which has been repeated countless times throughout the series. Because we're currently in a game state where it's rare for characters to outright die in the majority of scenarios, sustainability is valued more as a supplement than an actual necessity. Additionally, sustain elements are really overtuned in this game in that dedicated healers like Barbara and Qiqi or dedicated shielders like Zhongli can render their entire team invincible. Their scaling vastly outpaces the rate at which enemies are able to deal damage. Also, many other characters in this game have innate defense that we actually have an oversaturation of healing and shielding, even prior to Sayu's release. Zhongli, Xinyan, Diona, Jean, Qiqi, Barbara, Bennett, Noelle, and Xingqiu. Plenty of options to choose from before and even more after. Kokomi, Toma, Goro, Yunjin, Shinobu, pretty much everyone who isn't explicitly full-on damage possesses a modicum of defensive support, enough to cover half of the party's needs at minimum while another sub-DPS or support covers the other half. As such, a character needs to provide something in tandem with healing or shielding for them to be considered. For Bennett, he supplies a metric ton of bonus attack. For Xingqiu, he facilitates a one-man Hydro Reactor while doing pretty serious damage himself. For Zhongli, he grants damage amplification and crowd control, so on and so forth. Not unlike her fellow tiny unit Qiqi, if all you provide is healing, that doesn't make for an impressive enough resume to occupy a party slot pragmatically speaking. Until new content is added where more focus is placed on survival and endurance, dedicated healers are of low priority as everything in Genshin is currently a DPS check, which is a problem. That's one reason. The other reason, and this is through no fault of Sayu, there already is the healing support for Anemo. Jean. The most common response I saw when searching up why hardly anyone uses Sayu is because of Jean. While the latter doesn't have mad roly-poly skills, she more or less does Sayu's job to greater effect while offering much of what other players want out of an Anemo unit. Dandelion Breeze is a carbon copy of Mujina Flurry, or rather I should say Mujina Flurry is a carbon copy of Dandelion Breeze, like legit. It creates an area field that continuously heals all friendlies and damages all baddies. They have the same cooldown, the same energy cost, and almost the same duration, except Jean's initial burst damage is exponentially stronger and provides an instant burst of healing on cast. Additional components are then granted based on constellations. Yes, I'm aware that Jean is a 5-star and Sai is a 4-star, but Genshin's been out for almost 2 years now. Those of us who've been playing since 2020 or early 2021 are likely to have at least one copy of her from losing 50/50s. Unless by some ungodly reason you always get Qiqi or someone else, to which I can't relate. My account is cursed to always pull Jean off banner, I don't know why. Anyways, if we go by what Sayu has to offer, her addition to Genshin's lineup was late. By the time she came out, every niche with the exception of her ground mobility was already filled out, leaving nothing but that ground mobility to distinguish herself from her predecessors. Sayu's power budget and design philosophy prioritized world exploration, omitting a lot of practical stuff out of her moveset. This could be a result of developers overestimating the value of healing again, but at the same time I can't really postulate why that rationale was still a thing in light of Sayu being released almost a year after Genshin's launch. They should have known that healing is of little import long before. I should clarify that Sayu's design overall is fine. Her roly-poly skill and elemental burst in concept are well executed. They're just severely inefficient and unwieldy to use. This might sound like a nitpick, but her elemental skill has a ridiculous amount of end lag, which can disrupt player momentum and feel very clunky to use in quick swaps even if you use it for merely the press version. And on the subject of inefficient, Sayu's missing a lot of stuff in her kit overall that really should be there. Stuff that would make her feel a lot better to play and give her much needed combat capability. Animal skills are mainly used for crowd control, grouping enemies together to make it easier to layer on the rest of your stuff. It was a missed opportunity for Sayu to not stick enemies onto her while rolling, especially since you can hold it for up to 10 seconds. Yelan's elemental skill has a similar property where she tags enemies while running around, and at the end of it they all get knocked towards the standing location. Outside of using it to get from point A to point B in record time, there's no real reason to hold on to Fuing Dash. It generates 1 energy every 3 seconds and only when attacking something, but the base damage on it is so low you'd be better off attacking with a different character during that time. However, Sayu's roly-poly mode has more than triple the duration of Yelan's lifeline, enough to latch onto a ton of enemies, and it would be a more fun way to do it compared to the others who just whoosh them together. Sayu basically turns into one of those balls from Katamari. Not sure how many of you know that series. It's the one where you have the giant ball that picks up stuff, it rolls over and gets bigger and bigger. It's a good franchise, you should play it. Alternatively, they could have made it momentum-based, where the longer you travel, the more the final kick's damage ramps up, giving a legitimate reason for players to use the full duration, and it would be an interesting way for Sayu to find success as a sub-DPS. Continuing on with that, Sayu's kit is completely void of buffs, debuffs, or anything of the sort. Take the Summon Daruma for instance. It's a physical entity, but it doesn't act like a target dummy despite her whole shtick being a ninja, and ninjas thematically use decoys all the time. I'm not saying every instantiated object should draw aggro, but it would have made perfect sense on Sayu's burst. Moreover, the added restriction where it can only damage one enemy at a time was unnecessary. Anemo is the element of area coverage. Everyone else attacks entire areas at the same time. Sayu's elemental burst can only hit one. Yes, through swirl it can technically count as AoE damage, but once again, that's endemic to the Anemo element itself and not Sayu. We're talking about her internal issues. Lack of persistent area coverage bars her from Taser comps, the one place where she could have seen viability if she just had a little bit more. These quality of life proposals wouldn't make her a top tier character, but she never was meant to be. She has gimmicky and situational moves. All the same, they're not even good in the situations intended for them. That is, not without significant investment. That's her main problem right now. She doesn't do enough, and whatever she is able to do can be more efficiently achieved by other characters both in and out of her element. Too much of her power budget was allocated to healing when healing is not of great importance, and the rest was funneled into a skill that's used more for exploration than actual combat. But with how teleport waypoints are liberally scattered throughout Teyvat, you're not expected to walk that much to begin with, and a lot of meaningful travel is vertical, such as climbing walls or gliding off a cliff, where Sayu's roly-poly mode doesn't work. No, you can't roll off a cliff even if you wanted to. Believe me, I tested that. Make no mistake, she makes exploration really fun, but the average player doesn't care enough to invest time and resources into her for that specific purpose. At best, she's an effective healer with excellent repositioning during a fight. At worst, she's an impractical way to apply swirl damage and provides absolutely nothing besides healing to her team. It would be easy for me to say with full confidence that Sayu's a trash unit, but she's not. If you don't have Yelan, she's the only one in Genshin who augments her travel speed, and if the landscape changes in the foreseeable future to where greater emphasis is placed on healing, then Sayu can and will be valuable. On a fundamental level, Barbara, Qiqi, and Sayu are good characters. There just isn't the right content for them at the moment. Even so, healing is healing, mobility is mobility. Sayu can realistically fit into any team composition. She functions in any situation, but she's not great at any situation. The reason I say she needs more stuff in her kit is because, as a 4-star character, you're already fighting an uphill battle with 5-star units being superior on average. The 4-stars that stay competitive are usually sub-DPS and support, and by extension, they need to vastly amplify their team's pressure while being as unintrusive as possible. For Sayu to contribute any relevant amount of damage, she has to be upfront, making her a very intrusive character, albeit unintentionally. Simply put, she's for fun. The few who actually use her do so for fun and for the memes, and she is fun. One thing is for certain, Sayu's a very enjoyable character to use if you're not concerned about damage or efficiency. But what do you guys think? Do you believe there's something about her that the player base is not giving enough credit for? Be sure to tell us in the comments. For now, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe. Consider following me on Twitter at VarsVerum for cursed tweets, joining my Discord server, and checking out my other Why No One Plays episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.